The member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the Morrison government's stable and certain approach to implementing lower taxes and removing red tape is helping families and small businesses across Australia, including in my electorate of Bennelong? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies, including the impact of a carbon tax?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question. And former Australian #1 tennis player and now a champion on behalf of the Australian Chinese community in Bennelong, Mr Speaker, and a champion on behalf of his entire community, with around 80,000 taxpayers in Bennelong getting the benefit of the tax cuts that recently passed this parliament, Mr Speaker. Cutting taxes and cutting red tape is core business for the coalition, Mr Speaker. That is why we have reduced tax rates for small and medium-sized businesses to 25%, Mr Speaker. That is why we've passed the most significant income tax cuts in more than 2 decades, Mr Speaker, which will see 94% of taxpayers pay a marginal rate of no more than 30 cents in the dollar, Mr Speaker. That is why, as a government, we have cut more than $5 billion worth of red tape, Mr Speaker, because it's simply not on that back in the 1960s, Saravi Parbo could take a nickel mine from discovery to operation in just 18 months, but today an iron ore mine in Western Australia could take 10 years to get the 4,000 approvals that is necessary. So that is why our deregulation task force is focusing on major infrastructure projects and getting them approved quicker, Mr Speaker, and food manufacturers, particularly with a focus on export and getting their red tape cut, as well as sole traders, Mr Speaker, and who are running micro businesses and ensuring that their regulation burden is reduced. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked, are there any alternative approaches? Well, we know on the other side of the House they have $387 billion of higher taxes, which Chairman Swan simply thinks are good and should be kept, and that will simply want to make you work a bit harder, Mr Speaker. Well, that's pretty funny. Higher taxes will want to make you work a bit harder. But, Mr Speaker, those retirees and housing and family business superannuation income tax cut hikes that the Labor Party was promising, that's not enough. Now we know that the member for Hunter wants a carbon tax, Mr Speaker, and no doubt he'll be supported by the member for Rankin, Mr Speaker, because the member for Rankin wrote a book called Glory Days where he said that the carbon tax that Labor introduced was easily as significant as any of the Hawke and Keating economic reforms, Mr Speaker. That's right. The member for Rankin thinks that a carbon tax is more important than floating the dollar, than reducing tariffs, than privatising industry, Mr Speaker. The reality is the Labor Party, as Paul Keating has said, has lost the ability to speak to the aspirations of Australians and to fashion policies to meet those aspirations. Only the coalition can be trusted to reduce taxes and create more jobs.
Concluded.